Welcome back, everyone. Great to see everyone. Super excited to see like how many of you were already waiting to get in here. The room is getting jam-packed, which I love seeing. But just great to have everyone back today. As you know, today we're gonna kick things off. First off, I'm gonna introduce Ann, and Ann's gonna give us a recap of yesterday. But we're gonna kick things off with Harold Clark. And Harold is not only, of course, the director of the Virginia Department of Corrections, but also the chairman of our Racial Disparity Committee. And as promised, President Precythe has promised that this racial disparity discussion is not just going to die in the vine. We're going to continue to talk about it. We're going to continue to have this in front of us at each and every one of our meetings. And so, but really excited to get to that today. And then afterwards, we're going to do our business meeting. And then we're going to be finished up with our 2021 winter conference. So with that, President Precythe, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. It is so good to see so many of you again today. I really appreciate the time you took yesterday. I think yesterday was great. In fact, Marshall told us that he's already heard from several of you following our data conversation, which is fantastic. That's what we're after. I got a lot of good information out of our leadership discussion. I thought that was really robust and great suggestions. And then listening to Josh and Veronica and Beth, I really appreciated the discussion around community supervision. So thank you all for your time and attention. I thought that it was interesting conversation with Thomas App yesterday. And it's always fascinating to hear other people's perspectives on the work we do. And then I also thought that Dwayne Betts did a phenomenal job and was a really great way to end the day. We always need to be fed information about the job that we do. And when we see success stories like that, it fuels me. And so I hope you all got a lot out of his talk yesterday too. So I'm excited for what we're going to do today. It's a short day. We're going to get through it and then we can get on with the things that we all have happening in our states. As Kevin said, this whole diversity, equity, the racial discussion, if we're not having it, then we're not in a position to have it in our own departments. So I appreciate those of you that are active members on the Racial Disparity Committee. I think we all continue to learn from each other. So I look forward to hearing what Harold and his group are going to bring to us today. So Kevin, thanks. Oh, hey, can I also give a shout out to your staff? Because they did a phenomenal job yesterday, keeping us moving, keeping everybody happening in and out. So kudos to them. So thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you, Ann, and boy, just kudos again to our staff. They make it look easy, and please believe me when I say that it's not. But they do a great job, and I really appreciate them as well. So thank you for saying that Ann. Okay, so without further ado, one of the things I'm going to suggest that each of you do is, like we did yesterday, is at the top right of your screen where it says View. Click on that and hit that speaker mode. I think you'll find it where you're just going to have Harold in your screen, and it just feels a little bit more intimate sometimes, and especially for a discussion like we're about to have. But it's my honor to introduce Harold. Harold, doesn't need an introduction. I mean, everyone across this country knows who he is, but at the risk that there might be someone on here that doesn't, he's got over 40 years of correctional experience. I know that sounds crazy because he looks 40 years old. Within those 40 years, though, he has been recognized countless times and been given awards and accolades from a wide variety of folks across the United States. And in each of those awards and accolades all point to his ability to lead people, to lead change, and to make people around him better. And I know for me, I'm just feel honored to be his friend and his colleague, and looking so much forward to hearing him today. Harold Clark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin, for that overly generous introduction. And Madam President, thank you as well for giving me a moment to talk about racial disparity and the work of the committee. As some of you may know, um, the association had a racial disparity committee for quite some time, but for the last 2 years or so, it has not been active. It was discontinued. However, after our last all directors meeting, it was decided to reconstitute the committee. And so we had our first meeting just this past week, the 18th of February. And just to mention, those who were in attendance included John Baldwin and Solomon Graves, Mike Lydolt, Carol Michi, Tim Ward, and myself. The conversation during the committee meeting was very much energized. There's a lot of energy in the room. And one thing that was made clear is that there is a lot of work left to be done in the area of racial disparity, racial justice within our country as well as within our institutions. Um, there's a cry for racial justice, and all of us have heard the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others that have been mentioned this past summer and has been going on for quite some time. Uh, the issue of Black Lives Matter has spurred a lot of controversy as well. And there's a lot of conversation about Black Lives Matter and so forth. And even that, because we are not sitting down and having conversations about it, people don't quite understand what Black Lives Matter. Some folks think Black Lives Matter means Black lives, only Black Lives Matter. But the real message is that Black Lives Matter also. Black Lives Matter as well. But because we're not having a conversation, even that simple intent is missed as people engage. So it's obvious that our country is in need of healing. Past President Barack Obama said back in 2008 that the path to a more perfect union means acknowledging that what ails the African American community does not just exist in the minds of Black people, that the legacy of discrimination and current incidents of discrimination, while less overt than in the past, are real and must be addressed. And I think that's a very clear and a very powerful statement, one that needs to be addressed within, again, our organization and one that needs to be addressed in the community at large. I think we all understand that prisons are a microcosm of society at large. And if these problems exist in the community, we can be assured that they exist in the prisons as well. Let me share another quote with you, a quote from Susan Gooden, who is the author of Race and Social Equity. And Susan Gooden is a professor at the University of Virginia. And Susan says that social equity, specifically racial equity, is a nervous area of government. Until this nervousness is effectively managed, public administration, social equity efforts designed to reduce racial inequities will not realize their full potential. Again, very, very powerful. And when I read that quote and she talks about government being nervous, it's a nervous area of government. I take that to mean us as well. It's a nervous area for us in corrections. It's a nervous conversation that needs to be had that we are not having. And let me share one last quote with you. And that's a quote that touched me when I first saw it. And it's a quote that I use to hold myself to account as I go about doing the job in corrections. And that's a quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King said, He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is cooperating with it. Again, three very powerful quotes that we could spend some time talking about and trying to figure out how they pertain to us as leaders of a lot of people, correctional agencies. You know, in our country today, we have about right about 1.3 million people incarcerated in federal prisons and state prisons as well. And when you stop and you reflect back on that number, right about two-thirds of that population are people of color. They're minorities. And so for us to operate our operations, our institutions and agencies without a focus in that area means that we are going to be missing a major part of our duties and responsibilities. Collective, I believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion ought to be a collective goal of ours. Diversity, equity, and inclusion ought to be a collective goal. But I put a question mark behind that because, as they say, I wasn't just born yesterday. And I know that not everybody wants to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a collective goal. But for us to be successful in our business, it must be, because if we are not going to see it that way, then we are not going to be true to creating effective public safety. And so it's going to be a situation in which we are going to be failing because we're not going to be, in my estimation, achieving the goals and the objectives that we are charged with achieving. Please indulge me for a moment and allow me to tell you a little bit about myself, a personal story, which will touch on some of the experiences that I've had in the community and experiences that I've had working in a prison as well, personally, and what I've also witnessed. And I will not bore you with it because I know many of you may have similar experiences as well. But coming from a Black man, who began my career in the Midwest, I've had quite a few challenges. And some will say it's a surprise that I was even able to get to the point of being the director of the system in Nebraska. But just a little bit of background, first of all, about me and my family. I am one of 9 children. My father is a minister, and he also was a nurse's aide, or was a minister, he's now deceased, and a nurse's aide. My mother stayed home and raised 9 children. I would say she had the toughest part of the job, but she thinks that's probably the easiest part of the job. She really enjoyed raising her children, her 9 children. And my parents were quite fortunate. They sent all 9 children to college. And so 2 sisters went to college in Panama. The other 7 came to the United States all across the country and went to college. Um, Several of my siblings, beside being professional otherwise, followed in my dad's footsteps. My 2 brothers, I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers. My 2 brothers are ordained ministers. My baby sister, the ninth child, Norma, she's a surgical nurse in Michigan, and she's also an ordained minister. My sister, Linda, a retired electrical engineer, she's an evangelist in Central and South America, and on and on and on. And so the religion runs through our family. So we have never been in trouble with the law or anything else. Not until I got to Nebraska, I began to have experiences with the law. I will share a story with you that touched me, that could have put me easily in the situation of Floyd, who was killed recently in Minnesota. One tale. So on my way to work in Nebraska, rush hour traffic, early morning, I noticed a police cruiser behind me. I looked up and I said, I better watch my speed limit and not give this guy any reason to stop me. So a few minutes later, I look up again, and there are 2 police cruisers behind me. They flashed their lights. I pulled over. on the side of the road. Rush hour traffic. Everybody's watching me on the side of the street as they're going by to work. I looked up. One police officer draw his gun and position himself on the passenger side of the car. One police officer is behind the car with his gun pointed at me to the back of the rear windshield. Another came to the door, rapped in the window, and said, "Turn it down." And another one is backing him up with his weapon pointed at me as well. I kept both hands in sight, not wanting these folks to shoot me. The officer said, "Turn the window down." So I turned the window down. He reached in, he opened the door and said, "Get out." I got out the car. They put me in the car. They spread my legs apart. They searched me. He took my IDs out my back pocket. He read my ID. And then he said, "You may go." I got in the car and drove across town to work. I got to work totally shaken, confused, sat in my office. I was a counselor at that point. And then I went and I spoke to Superintendent Foster and I told him what happened. He called the police department and to figure out why they stopped me and what occurred. And they told him that they got the person that they're looking for and that it was a black man who had robbed a shoe store the day before. The only thing this person and I had in common is that we were both black men. I'm 6'1", he was 5'8". He was dressed in an army fatigue. I was dressed professionally to go into work. He was driving a Rambler of all things, and I was driving a Monte Carlo. No similarities besides us being a black man. That just really shook me to the core. That ruined my day, and I share that story with you to let you understand that it can happen to all of us, minorities, and that I could have easily been a George Floyd. If I'd made one bad move in that car with all those pistols pointed at me, it could have been a bad story, a bad situation that somebody will have had to try to explain after the fact. So, so let's dispense with that for a second. Let me share with you a story about now I have progressed in the system. I'm an assistant superintendent over trustee services at the state penitentiary. My boss was the deputy warden, and then the warden. That was the hierarchy. There was going to be a cleaning day at the trustee dormitory. And so the deputy warden called about 15 of us in, middle managers, my equals, most of them, and announced that there's going to be a cleaning day. And then he said, "And you, Clark, I want you to come in coveralls because I want you cleaning with the inmates because your type knows how to do that best." Not one of my colleagues, all white men in the room, said a word. Once again, I was a pariah, stood out like I had many, many times. And I have many examples of that I could share, but we don't have enough time for that. I stood out once again many times, like I had in the past in that system. I did not, just to complete that story, I did not put on coveralls the following day. I was so mad, I was ready for a fight. That following day, I put on my best suit and went to work. And I was ready for a confrontation. He did not say a word to me. He looked at me and he ignored me. And I moved on and we got the job done. One other story before I stop my stories. So I was a counselor in Nebraska, and I needed to have a conversation with the security coordinator. The security coordinator was just down the hall from me. And so I walked down the hall, knocked on his door, opened it and walked in. at the very moment that a young black man who happens to be on my caseload was thrown in the corner against the safe. And when he bounced off the safe, a lieutenant, the captain threw him in the corner, a lieutenant uppercut him in his chest. They saw me and everything stopped. The superintendent was also in the office witnessing this beating, and everything stopped. I looked at them, they looked at me. I walked out, went back down the hall to my office and sat. For the rest of the day, they took turns one at a time, all but the superintendent, coming down to my office and just sat there and looked at me. And not a word was said about anything. How do I counsel this young black man on my caseload after having such an experience to include the superintendent? I knew not what to do. A whole week went by, and I was like walking in limbo. And at the end of that week, I decided I have to do something about it. Scott Frakes may know this person because he's still in the legislature today. I went down to the Capitol building and spoke to Senator Ernest Chambers, who was the only black senator in the legislature, because there's nobody in the department I could speak to. Senator Chambers invited Senator Fowler, a white man who was very influential in Nebraska politics, a legislator. And we went to Senator Fowler's home and sat down, and I shared with them my experiences. These gentlemen promised they will protect me and that they will take action. A big investigation ensued a few weeks after that. My name was never mentioned. The legislature made a lot of changes in the code impacting the Department of Corrections because of that experience. Nothing was ever said to me about that by anyone in the department, but I always suspected that they thought I was behind it, and it followed me all the way through my career in Nebraska, up until the point that I became the warden of the state penitentiary, and then became the director after being the warden, was appointed to director by the governor, and the whole world changed. The whole world changed for me in that system. And I remained in that system as director for 15 years. The last 15 were obviously the best 15 that I served in that department after almost 31 years, the last 15 as director. But I say those stories too, and I share them with you to let you understand that it's the black staff and other minority staff, it's the black inmates that are experiencing these things in the community. And if they're happening in the community, chances are they're going to happen in the prisons as well, because you're a macrocosm of what happens out there, of society at large. And it's happening to black inmates also. So I'm going to pause at this minute, and I think Tim Ward is with us this morning. And Tim, if you are here, I'd like you to just speak up. And I've asked Tim to share an experience of his as well with the group before we move on, and then share some other thoughts about the committee and where I think we ought to be going as a whole in addressing this issue. So Tim, are you with us?
Yeah. Thank you, Harold, for those words. And we stand on some broad shoulders, standing on your shoulders. And I'm gonna go a little bit different as far as talking about, this being a macrocosm. And I think I have a similar career path as you, Harold. Started as a correction officer, but also I went into counseling. And one of my jobs as being a counselor, I was over the classification committee at one of the facilities. And I noticed that every time that I would assign guys to vocational programs, because vocational skills is what they really need as far as with the education piece to make sure that they don't reoffend and be successful as far as the reentry back into society. And if I assign a person of color to electrical, diesel mechanics, welding, drafting, or plumbing, or either to the firefighter program, I would that following week receive something that's called a work activity performance report. And it would always be a negative connotation about the individual to take them off. But whenever I signed a guy of color to the kitchen detail, the dorm orderly, or general ground maintenance, it would stay that way. And so I would have to almost at some point be almost like a mediator with the instructor or either the officer who was assigned to the vocational program. Say like, look, why not work this guy? I mean, I'm looking at this guy's file. He already has the work experience as doing the vocational assignment that you got him assigned to. He has that skill. Why not put this individual over here who does not have the skill so he can gain those skills to go out there? And similar to Harold's situation, I got that call to the warden's office and said, how to do assignments and things of that nature. So it is, as far as that racial disparity piece, and it is kind of like a microcosm of the free world inside. All of those high skill positions that those guys could have utilized and been successful outside, they didn't have the opportunity. And then when I tried to do that opportunity and try to put those guys in those different details, I got called on the carpet. But needless to say, like Harold, as I got into a position to make those changes as a warden, I did those changes as a superintendent chief of staff. And now we have mechanisms in place that those things are not happening in the system anymore. But we still have to watch it because there are still cultural pockets in my state that still do things like that. We just got to make sure that we keep a check on those things. And so that's just a little quick story about some of the things that I have to deal with early on in my career. Yeah, I think you're still muted.
Well, thanks, Tim, for sharing your story. I believe that we are in the business of helping people to be better. That's what we strive to do. And so we think of reentry, and I think reentry needs to be for all. And just using Tim's story and many others that I've seen, I'm not sure that reentry is for all, because people are not accessing reentry equally. The decisions that we made in education, the decisions that we made for programs, the decisions that we made for school, work and so forth, all goes towards preparing individuals to effectively go back out and engage in society. So we need to create a sense of urgency, in my estimation. And yesterday, we spent some time talking about data, and we spent some time talking about community corrections. Well, data can really help us with this challenge. Data can help us to understand how we are treating people within our system, how the decisions that we are making are impacting folks, everything from work assignment to programming opportunities and so forth. Yesterday, we also talked about the executive director of APPA talked about drug courts and so forth. Well, the data in Virginia makes it very clear to us that minorities are not accessing drug courts and those specialized courts. It's Caucasians primarily who are going to those courts. Data internally tells us within our department that we have similar problems in minorities accessing the things that will help them to be effective in reentry. So that's why I asked the question, reentry for who? For whom? Is it for all? My vision for prisons is that prisons ought to be like places where we can, where offenders can live and learn and thrive. And it's up to us to create those environments. We are, as correctional leaders, responsible for creating those environments. So I ask the questions. Do we know the impact of our policies? Do we know the impact of our practices? Do we know our traditions and what our traditions are causing to occur? A lot of traditions that are not recorded, They're not documented in policy or any place else, but they nonetheless exist, and they determine what happens or doesn't happen within our organizations. So I say to all of us that we must do our homework, and we must be prepared to have dialogue, honest dialogue with people that look like us and don't look like us, people that are the same level and people who are not at our level. One of the biggest charges I think we have is the recruitment and retention, not of necessarily entry level people, but people at the upper level who are going to be responsible for assisting with leadership within our organization. Do we know what our leaders stand for? Do we know how they engage? Do we know what they're most likely prone to do or not to do? Another thought I have is that we must engage all of our stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders, in conversations about DEI. They need to understand the DEI concepts, and that as an organization, we embrace DEI. Leadership and all the actions that we take involving diversity needs to be deliberate. They need to be deliberate, and they need to be strategic. Because as I think Kevin said earlier, DEI should not be a check mark. Either Kevin or Ann said it. It should not be a check mark. It should be a journey that we are on for the long haul. Because if you put it as a check mark and you check that box today and move on, you're going to find that you're only going to lose grounds over and over again. So I believe that we need to, and the committee believes that we need to leverage diversity as a strength. Seek it out, put it, make it visible, put it in place, appreciate it, and leverage it as a strength. And if we don't make those things clear, we are going to be messaging the wrong things to all the people whom we intend to lead. They're not going to get the message. So the question is, what are the next steps? And what I'd like to do this morning is just to open it up and have a discussion and a conversation amongst ourselves. But I just want to share with you some things that the committee suggested. And one of the things the committee suggested was that as a next step, we have a diversity summit. And perhaps we can discuss that as well in conversations about a diversity summit in which we bring in individuals who are skilled in this area that can lead us in that summit, and then of course structure it to allow us then to have a chance to do some thinking and planning on our own. And one thing I want to leave you with, I don't want to say I'm challenging you or charging you, but I just want to encourage you to do something that I have done that has worked very well for me. And that is to create a directors diversity council. And you can structure that council in a number of different ways. The way we are doing it now in Virginia is a director diversity council comprises people from all levels within the organization. Uh, Counselors, officers, you name it, medical personnel, food service personnel, and they come from all across the state. And they are charged, or they are authorized to take a look at any policy, any practice, any incident, any issue that we have thought about or haven't thought about that pertains to diversity that they would like to bring to the attention of the executive leadership team. And they have direct access to us. No limitations whatsoever, no reins at all. And that will open up conversations, and you can have a lot of rich dialogue. It opens up your eyes to things that are going on within your organization that you may not know about because you did not specifically ask about it and no one responded to you about it or gave you a response. So I will challenge you to be bold and just have a directors diversity council and give them free rein to go out there and get the job done. And you'll see what you learn and how many opportunities that may present themselves that can cause you to make some good changes, some progressive changes. And in this instance, our council does not only focus on racial diversity. Our council is charged with taking a look at all forms of diversity, not just racial diversity. So I invite you to do that. And then speaking of invitations, in conclusion, I also invite you to, when our meetings are up and running, any and all of you are invited to join our meetings as well, because we like to hear your voices and to add to that plethora of knowledge and information that I know that you possess and are willing to share. So I will stop at this point, Kevin, and suggest that we just open up the floor for conversation and see what's in the minds of our colleagues.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Harold. Great job with your presentation. I know my phone is blowing up with text messages, and I know that there's a bunch going on in the chat room. So there's definitely folks that have got some things to say. Just like Harold said, let's open it up and just see if any of you have comments, suggestions, feedback, anything at all. Looks like Rob Green in Maryland's got a suggestion. Rob?
Well, I just first, Harold, to you, you have always been a mentor to me from the day that we were introduced, and I thank you for your conversations.
Thank you.
Today, and I know I frequently bother you on the phone when I need a good answer. Your thoughts around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and when you paused on inclusion, and your words around whether everyone wants it or not, it's absolute. Your focus on a deliberate focus here, again, absolute. We all have our stories, and your story was so compelling, and perhaps just sharing with my colleagues as being placed in a position to be the father of a young Black man in my family, was an incredible journey for us as a family, and believing how focused I was as an individual around diversity, and I did not understand his journey. And for me, again, some incredible experiences for me as an individual. That aside, because I get very emotional in some of the things that we have experienced as a family. I do believe the very deliberate nature of this work, that we declare diversity, equity, and inclusion a core principle. How you've designed it in Virginia, again, I believe in that wholeheartedly. I am privileged to have a very culturally and linguistically diverse staff, but to that same, I think, inclusion was not occurring to the level that it needed to occur in my organization. Part of inclusion is recognizing the privilege where we have been, but what we have not done around inclusion. So while we can, talk about achieving diversity and looking at equity, I still believe there are many people that can't define equity and equality and understand the difference between the two. But inclusion, and how we include our staff, the individuals that we are tasked with changing their lives. And it really struck me when you talked about Reentry for All. That was the very name of the program that I established in my previous life. And that's how we looked at it. Reentry for all. Everyone's experiences are not equal. We get hung up on equality. We don't look enough at equity. So I would very much like to be involved in this work. To be an adjunct, a volunteer for your committee, and I applaud the association, but you and this group for recognizing it, and I think we as an association deliberately declaring our intent. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome to join your committee at any time.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate you sharing that information with us. That's the powerful stuff. I'm trying to look at all 4 pages. So if I'm delayed on someone, I do see Tony in New York. Tony, the floor is yours, sir. Looks like we have you on mute still, Tony.
How's that?
There you go.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I always forget these little technological nuances. But Harold, thank you for sharing that. I mean, really incredible story. And I think this whole process is what this whole country has to do. As a starting point, all of us need to listen and listen carefully. Those of us who are not people of color need to sit quietly and attentively listen to the stories of people like you and courageously sharing that. That's the only way we're going to make progress, not just listen and not read your BlackBerry or your iPhone, but really listen and stop and think, how would I feel? How would I feel if I just went through an experience like that? And if we really start to think at that level, we will make progress as a country. No question, we in corrections, wherever we are, have an important responsibility to do. And you're right on data. We can look at so many different things to ensure that there is equality in the housing and in the job assignments and who's selected for which position and training and implicit bias and all of those things. But on the affirmative side, I think we need to go a step further, because all of us can do one thing that I really put a lot of time and emphasis in, and that is putting a human face on the incarcerated individual and helping to show to the world what people are capable of becoming. None of us would be in this business if we did not believe in the power of human beings to change and to become better. And so when we can do that and then show that to the world, right, we can really help effectuate change. Most people, when they see what somebody did when they got arrested, and that's usually the perp walk photo, and it's the most unflattering picture any of us could ever have taken. The person looks angry, the person looks scared. What a difference to show them a different picture. Like when somebody is walking up to a stage wearing a cap and gown and getting a diploma. Case in point was the man we heard from yesterday, right? Phenomenal story. What a difference where he was, where he became, what he's still capable of doing. And sometimes I think, unfortunately, the media celebrate people like that as having gotten to where they've gotten to in spite of the correctional system, not either because of the system or with the help of the system. And certainly Scott Semple is a big reason why people like that got to where they go. I hardly believe that in our system, we have the ability to show to the world that behind our walls are people that can make change and who want to make change, not in their own lives, but back into their communities. People that want to address gun violence, people that want to show to young people, don't make the mistake I made. When I was 19, when I was 18, and I thought it was great to run in a gang or get a gun, and I regret to the rest of my life what I did, don't make the mistake I made. Those voices are very powerful, and allowing them to be youth mentors, things along that nature. The outside world doesn't know that we are doing so many things like that to really bring about change. So really, I think we as an organization need to recognize that, need to promote that, and we'll make the change. And one last thing, Harold, you are the CLA answer to the picture of Dorian Gray. You never age, my friend. So thank you.
Thank you. Your comments, I think, are spot on, not about aging, but everything else that you said.
Let's see, Tim Ward, did you have a comment, Tim?
No, I'm
Okay.
good, but just to be a part of this conversation, if it's a time to really attack it and make a change, this is the time to do it right now, because I think we have the leadership, I think we have the eagerness, and I think it's the right time to be bold and courageous and go out there and do something great.
I agree. Thank you, Tim. Let's see, I'm going to go to Scott Frakes next, but Harold, I do have a question for you that came up from Ed McNeil.
Sure.
Ed's one of our partners to CLA. He asked if some of our partners would be able to sit on the Racial Disparity Committee, and I think the example he gave is a very good example in that they've their companies are also suffer from these same things and could absolutely improve from these same conversations that we're having. Just curious to see how you might feel about including others onto this committee.
I don't have a problem whatsoever. I think inclusion is all what it's all about. We want to hear the voices, and we want to embrace that diversity of both the public sector, the private sector. Uh, they're welcome.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Harold. And Ed, thank you very much for that question. Great question. Okay, let me kick it over to Scott Frakes. Scott is our treasurer and director of Nebraska Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Kevin. Harold, always a pleasure.
Thank
Know
you.
that your legacy in Nebraska lives on and will probably forever, like you.
You never know.
So, here we're a state that is less than diverse, 83% Caucasian, about 4% African American in the community, and yet 25% of the prison population is Black.
Yeah.
Pretty much, and about 50% of the prison population is white as compared to the 83% in the community. So the one thing that we knew we could look at and could directly impact was what was happening internally. We pulled some data a couple months ago, about 3 months ago, and liked some of what we saw, but also saw some things that really did make us scratch our heads. While in general, the job assignments across the agency lined up fairly well with the racial profile of the agency. When we started to dig down a little, we found that at the individual level, sometimes at a facility level, sometimes at a work unit level, like our industries, there were entire crews that were all Caucasian, which makes you kind of wonder what's going on. So we're going to continue to dive into that. And another one that just jumped out that we're now really trying to do some good analysis and try to figure out is why are half of the misconduct reports in our system tied to the Black population? So they make up 25% of the inmate population. They get half of the misconduct reports across our system. I have some thoughts. I definitely have some questions. And so we're going to, peel that one apart, see what we can learn, and then figure out what are the strategies that help move it the right way. I struggle to think that it is simply that part of the population is that much worse behaved than the rest of my population. So just wanted to share. I think there is lots of opportunities to look internally and question what we do, and that those questions and that work and bringing them in, like you talked about, staff inclusion, getting them involved in that process can also help move us the right direction in getting people thinking about this much differently than we have. Thanks. Great to see you.
Great, great. Good to see you, Scott, and thanks for your comments. But again, I think you're spot on. Several years ago, the committee's work caused the development of an instrument that you can use as self-assessment instrument to see how you're doing within your departments. And so, Kevin, perhaps you ought to take a look at getting that instrument out again, because we have had a lot of changes in our organization since that was first published. And some of the things that Scott's talking about, that instrument will help you get a deep dive into those areas to see how you're doing.
Kevin,
Okay, you got it, Harold. Thank you. Ann.
One of the things that I'm just sitting here thinking about as I'm watching the chat and making notes, it might be good on our website, where we talk about our committees. It might be good including some references under somewhere, whether we create a spot on the website or we put it under the Racial Disparity Committee. But it seems that a lot of states have committees, and I'm curious, are they policies? Is it a directive? I mean, I'd be very curious to just see, and I'm thinking that including something on the website where it's accessible to us and we can go and see what are the different things that are happening. I think that might be a really good place to start, to give folks an opportunity to sort of figure out what is it they want to do in their state, but what have other states done? So I just kind of throw that out there as something that might be helpful for us to get started. And then having a whole resource section that includes other materials. So, because I always appreciate these discussions when we have them. And you know, now my brain is starting to think that if we have this section, maybe there are some of you that would like to make a 5 or 10 minute video that we could put on there that shares your story, that helps us think about this in a way that's personal, you know, and it's not just something we talk about. And Robert, when you talk about inclusion, you know, that's something that I think culturally a lot of us fight, because there's just that simple mentality of a good old boy system, and inclusion totally busts that whole thing up. So I just think there's more we can do to help each other out from this angle. So I just throw those out there.
Like it.
Mhm.
Like it. Thank you, Ann. Dean Williams. Dean is our Western Region Chairman and also the Director of Colorado Department of Corrections. Dean?
So, hi, it's good to see you all virtually, and Harold, great presentation. I think, man, I love the way that you set this up, because I think a big thing that we're facing, and I wanted to spike Harold's recommendation around a diversity council. We did the same thing here, and several others on the chat have talked about they're doing it too. I think part of what we're trying to accomplish is, one, getting over some of the denial, not some of the denial. We are in denial, I think, in many ways in the country and in our systems. And I think with the Diversity Council allowing staff from all different ranks to go, because I did exactly the same thing Harold did, and it's eye-opening. And here's the other thing that happens a little bit in that process of creating a council of employees and staff who really are going to say, you have a clear field to look at all policies, to look at disparity in disciplinary issues or job opportunities, and to go everywhere, right? Things I'm not even thinking of. And you come and you brief me about what you're finding out. And what happens in that process that I'm starting to see is a bit of a truth and reconciliation of the damage that has been done in the past, and the acknowledgement that something is wrong. And the experience of not only our minority staff, African-American staff, of the way they have moved through the system, or the way they view our department, could be, just might be different than our Caucasian staff. And is there anything, and oh, by the way, I think we have some significant problems. To Scott's point, we're not at 25%, Scott, we're at 20%, with a 4%, 5% minority African-American population. They're 20% in Colorado. So nobody is holding themselves up here. And I think diversity council, if you're a state in your jurisdiction, like, what is the one thing I should do? Like, where should we start even? And I think it's around that area of including staff to say, you're going to take us, you're going to take a look at this. It's not going to be just me directing it. No. You look and you find where you turn over all the rocks, and to see where it's at, and then bring it back to us to see then what we're going to do about it. And to your point, I don't even think we have a policy around this diversity council. They call themselves GRACE, which is a long acronym, GRAACE, which is a long acronym that stands for something. But I think you're right. I think probably, I mean, what it's leading me to is that we're going to have a policy around that diversity council. The fact that I want to memorialize it and put it in, so it's just not under my tenure, that this is going to be a thing we're going to do, because this needs to be a thing we're going to do for a while. I don't know how long a while is, but it's years. Because, and I think a lot of what happens with this sort of truth and reconciliation with our staff is going back and saying something has been wrong. And that will bring people along to say that we're serious about it. And no disrespect to our governor's offices, but a lot of these EDI things that are put out sometimes just don't hit it, right? They're like, check the box, do the training, and you're like, does anything really change? And then our staff look at that and go like, oh, great, they're checking the box. And I think through a diversity council or taking that step, it's a deeper commitment. And quite frankly, you uncover what are maybe some of more of the deeper dysfunctions that have occurred. And I think you bring staff along because it shows the seriousness of the effort. So good job on everybody else who's leading that way. I just think there's some real opportunity to grow here.
Thanks so much for sharing, Dean. I concur with your comments wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Dean. Great job. Okay, let's see here. Carol, do you have a, okay, there you are, Carol. Carol Michi is the Northeastern Regional Chair and the Commissioner in Massachusetts.
So hi, everyone. As usual, Harold, fantastic job.
Thank you.
You started that committee back here and it's still going. It's not going as strong as it should. So I've resurrected that and made some nice staffing changes. So we're gonna get that committee going strong. But I just wanted to point out one more thing. We talk about statistics, which I think data is very important. And we talked a lot about this at our meeting last week, that people should look at their data. So we look at that data all the time, but we look at it. We need to do something with the data. So it's not only that your institutions or your staffing don't match probably the population that you serve. We talked about that at great length. I know at Massachusetts, it certainly does not, but it's also about who keeps coming back into the system. I think somebody brought it up at our Diversity Council meeting last week that, you know, it's not just about the unfair possible treatment inside, but who keeps coming back through the door, who keeps recidivating. So I looked at those stats and it was just, it's alarming. So in Massachusetts, 49% of the population is white. This is my 2017 cohort, 1 year recidivists. But 24% Black, but way higher recidivism rates for the Black, and they're only half the population. So it really is alarming when you look at the data. I would love to see that tool sent out as well that Harold talked about, so we can really do some more digging. But so again, I just wanted to bring up, it's not just who's in our custody, but it's who keeps coming back. So we're not doing something right on the inside. We need to do better. And these conversations.
You know, and Carol, a lot of things could be contributing to that result that you're seeing. It could be because they're not being selected, like we were saying, to participate in the programs in the front end, getting the opportunities. And it could also be in the implicit biases that they encounter in the community that's causing them to be chosen as the ones to be brought back.
I agree.
So a whole lot of things can influence that.
Yep.
Thank you, Carol. Great comments. Let's see, we've got about 5 more minutes, but I am scanning all 4 pages to see if any of you have a hand up or a virtual hand up or anything. So I apologize if I'm not seeing you right off the hand. Tony Annucci in New York.
So one last thing, because obviously every correctional system gets input at the front end by the courts and the district attorneys. And for some reason, rarely does the conversation go to what their policies and practices are. If the makeup of our systems are disproportionate to the populations in our state with minorities, then the question should also be asked of the district attorneys of the state. And they are the most important party at the front end that determines who goes to prison for how long. What are their policies and practices? And I think that the natural evolution of this is to ask them to be part of any initiative that we're doing here, because they control who comes in the front door. We have absolutely no discretion to reject anybody or to say it was unfair or you treated the white person more leniently than the African-American. We get who the courts pronounce sentence on, but since 97% or so are plea bargaining, it's the district attorneys that have the most say in who comes to prison at the front end, at least for the first time, and for how long. So that is a conversation that should also be happening. But since it's local, right? Since every district attorney is a local official who's elected by his or her particular county, they seem to skate on these issues, and they need to be part of this conversation.
Exactly.
Thank you, Tony. I see Solomon Graves, who is the leader in Arkansas of corrections and a part of the Diversity Council. Solomon, the floor is yours, sir.
Hey, where I'm at, good morning, everyone. Wanted to follow up on something that Tony said, because it was a real problem in Arkansas when it came to my community correction division, and Harold touched on this as part of his comments with what he's seen in Arkansas. My community correction division is 80, in terms of residents going into those facilities, are 80% white. We had some jurisdictions, some judicial districts, as we call them in Arkansas, that have not sent a Black offender to a community correction center in the last 2 calendar years. What we were able to do this past legislative session, and I give Secretary Kelly all credit for this. This was a proposal that I inherited from her after she retired. In Arkansas, you can only go to a community correction center if you were judicially transferred there. We got through a change in our code during this legislative session that beginning this summer will give me the ability to administratively transfer eligible offenders from our prison division to my community correction division. And for those of you who have similar limitations in your state, because we tried to work with the prosecutors and just didn't get anywhere with them. So we finally took it upon ourselves to say, Governor and legislature, give us the ability to manage our population the way we need to. So for those of you who have similar restrictions in your state, I would suggest you look at that route, not just as a way to better utilize your beds, but also a way to address those disparities. Because in a state where I've got 20% minority as generally statewide in our population in the community, I should not be able to walk into a facility and not see a minority resident. And that's where we were. And to be quite honest, that is intentional in certain parts of this state. So.
And
Wow.
Solomon, I don't think
Good.
you're alone. I think you'll find the experience in a lot of places, even in my home state. And we see ourselves as progressive and doing a lot of good things, but yet still you're going to find that there are pockets where people are making decisions that are totally the opposite of what your expectations are. And so we have to look for those things as the leaders.
Thank you, Solomon. Commissioner Parker is the commissioner of the state of Tennessee in corrections. He's also the elected president for ACA. Tony, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Harold. Great job. Everyone, great job. Just some
Thank
really
you.
good comments. And I just want to share a couple of things that, so much of what Tony has said and others have said about our criminal justice partners being involved in this initiative I know, and Derek, I don't know if Derek's on the call or not, but when he was in Tennessee, we passed a law in Tennessee in 2016 called the Public Safety Act that really dealt with a lot of progressive criminal justice reform. And we initiated and codified in law a lot of the things we talked about yesterday related, and that Ann is so familiar with a history of community supervision, with graduated sanctions and best practices and using risk-informed tools, validated risk needs tools to really make criminal justice decisions. And when we look at the topic that we're talking about here and how decisions made not only in our division in corrections, but also outside with the courts and with the DAs, it's so critical that we get them in a part of this conversation, because many times our hands are tied when it comes to decisions that's made with that person on probation or parole. When you talk about the utilizing graduated sanctions to, avoid for that low risk offender that has a nonviolent technical violation, not bringing him back in a correctional environment, but being able to keep them in the community where they're most effective, where they can keep their job. And in my opinion, a lot of these individuals really don't know what the research says. They live in their little, as Harold said, a microcosm of a community where they wear the black robe, right? And it's their opinion, and we all know what opinions are like, but none of them really understand the research and how their decisions and how race is involved in their decisions. And in many cases, discrimination is involved. So we really have to, I think, work educating ourselves and also educating the public and people that are in the criminal justice realm that make decisions that send people to our front doors each and every day. But thanks for giving me an opportunity just to make that comment, and really great discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Let's see. Any response to that, Harold, or?
No, I think he's right on. And I think that as the directors and commissioners and secretaries, we have the ability to different degrees, depending on where you are, to influence the courts and others. And I think we need to seize the opportunity to do just that, because we cannot make all of the decisions ourselves. And so I think wherever we can influence and go out there and educate and create partners and collaborate, we ought to be doing so.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Harold. Let's see. Marcus Hicks is the commissioner in the state of New Jersey and also our elected vice president. Marcus, the floor is yours, sir.
Hey everybody. This has been so great, and I appreciate everyone's feedback. I just wanted to say, to Tony's point, and I think Solomon and Harold, in New Jersey, we have 60% of our population is Black and 20% is white in the institutions. A 3-to-1 disparity. This is even though we have dropped our population by 34% since I came on board as commissioner. So even though the overall numbers are dropping, the racial disparity is still there, which I think is telling. And it goes to this point of sentencing. And we have in New Jersey, between the mandatory minimums that were on the books for years that are starting to be addressed now, we just had some laws that are in effect that disproportionately affect African Americans. And I'll give you one in particular. We have a school zone law that says that if you're caught with CDS within, let's say, 500 feet of a school, you get enhanced penalties on top of the charge that you're getting sentenced to. Well, in your urban areas, they're 500 feet with the school literally could cover an entire city, where you have, disproportionate African Americans, minorities reside there. The same law that would be applied in another part of the state, same crime, same law, is going to have a disproportionate impact. I just say that because those are the types of things that we don't control, but I think legislators need to hear and they need to see the data of how that impacts what we do and what we get. And that could be a very simple fix. That's a legislative fix. But I think part of this is having the research and the data to look at those very specific things, because I can tell you that is a big part of one of the reasons why we have this disparity, that on top of other things. So I just bring that up because as we're talking yesterday about potential ways that we can use data, and I was just thinking about this, maybe we could take a look at some of these laws and policies that have a disparate impact on our population. We can engage, CSG or some of these other folks to assist us with that, because that would be I think that would be a great tool to be able to go back to the legislators or whomever. We all know that the tough on crime narrative, we know what the results are of that, right? And we know now what works and what doesn't work. But I think if we were able to engage in some sort of research where we can show that, then we can take that to the prosecutor's office. We've had some very frank conversations with them because they just weren't getting it. I mean, they have their mission and, they have their job, and sometimes it's not consistent with what our mission is. And so I feel like that's something that we could probably look into as an organization.
No, I concur. I think you're again right on, and I think in different states we're going to find opportunities along those lines to correct the code, that could certainly make a difference in who comes to us, and not only who comes to us, but the severity of the sanctions that they are imposed.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hicks. Great comments. You know, one thing is for sure, Harold, I'm sure you're feeling it too. But as I mentioned before, my phone is blowing up, my inbox is blowing up on just so many suggestions, and there's so much passion around this topic. It feels like, you know, of course, this will be a board's decision, but it feels like the absolute correct thing to do would be for us to set up a summit this year. Mm-hmm. where we can spend quality time, not just, you know, talking about these issues and being uncomfortable with these things, but as Carol, I think, said, put some action behind it. Let's talk about like specific things that we can do
exactly.
As an association. And it sure fits our name of being, you know, correctional leaders. It's a great opportunity for us to lead and to be very, to lead out loud, frankly, on this topic. Mm-hmm. So great discussion by everyone. I'm just going to scan the pages real quick again to see if there's any other hands up that I haven't seen. If you haven't done so already, please click on that chat box and just go through the comments and suggestions that are in there, because there's some great nuggets in there that you'd want to that you're going to want to see and read. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing any other hands coming up at this point. And so can I turn it back over to you for any closing comments for this session?
Yes, thank you, Karen. And I just want to thank you all for, first of all, your attention, and also for your active participation in the conversation. As said earlier, there's a lot of work to be done. And this work can take us in a lot of different directions, impacting the things that we are controlling internally, our ability to influence externally, and so forth. So I think as the committee determined when we met last week, there's a lot of work to be done, and we are excited about it. I certainly agree. I think Tim said that this is the time. The time is right. But I think the time is always right to address this issue. And so again, thank you all for your attention and for your participation. And we are going to find ways, we're going to go to work to find ways to get some things done, some things, concrete things addressed, and hopefully also implemented. So thanks again.
Thank you, Harold. Great job. Thank you to your committee, and for those that are going to be coming on to the committee. You know, this association provides a lot of opportunities for us to be proud, but probably this has got to sit way up there at the top for us to be able to do something, like just let's do something about this, and great opportunity for us to lead. So thank you again, everyone. Great job, Harold Clark.